Well, any ology is the study of something or the emphasis on something. Eschaton is eschatos, the end in Greek. Eschatology, the study of the end. The end times, all right? Because, of course, the adjective stands as a noun. The end what? The end times, all right? Now, there are two statements that I keep returning to in Ellen White's writings. And it's Mrs. White's writings that I think give us the interpretive framework for how we're applying what's in the Bible. Yes, it's there in the Bible, but we're interpreting it a certain way. A way that you wouldn't necessarily get out of it just by reading the Bible. Okay? The first statement is that the health message will, in large measure, protect the remnant from the effects of the 7 last plagues. Well, I printed it up. I'm not going to give it out till the end of the quarterly. I have 300 of them sitting on the sheet. I don't want to give it out yet. The second one is that, I was hoping somebody would look, see if I'm making this up. The second one is that the health message will have to do a work in perfecting Christian characters that it has not yet done. Now, what does that have to do with anything? How does that have to do with last day events? It is the last day event. Are you thinking of another quotation? What is it? Yes, when the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced in his people, then the end will come. There's another one. Yes, that's the third one I printed on the page, because that's related to the other one about it has to do a work of perfecting Christian character that it hasn't yet done. All right. So, it has to do with end time events, eschatology, because, of course, we might say some things today based on today's situation that you wouldn't necessarily say from the Bible. Vegetarianism, for instance. This question comes up all the time, and it's the obvious one. Didn't Jesus, well, you know where the rest of the question's going? Eat fish? He not only ate fish, what'd he do? He just didn't eat it. What did he do? Yes? Multiplied it. That's right. The folks were there. They needed something to eat. He made sure that they had fish and bread to eat.
Well, he also ate lamb and all that.
Yes, lamb. That's right. He would have had to have done that for the Jewish system. What else? Of course, the last meal that we hear of in the Bible isn't the Last Supper, when we're talking about Jesus, right? What is it? What? Fish where? On the beach. The breakfast. The last meal was a breakfast, if you recall. There's a sort of a strange thing that has to do with exegesis of the Gospels that I don't want to go into in details, but 2 of the Gospels end in Jerusalem, and 2 of the Gospels end in Galilee. It's very odd, right? Did you ever notice that? Which 2 Gospels end in Jerusalem? Whoops. I thought we knew the Gospels anyway. How many Gospels are there in the canon? 4. Why isn't the Gospel of Thomas in the canon? Don? Not there yet. Now then, well, let's start with Matthew. Where does it end? In Galilee. Oh. If Matthew was was present, why didn't he tell about the ascension and the further events, we presume, in Jerusalem? Mark, of course, we're cheating when we say how Mark ends, aren't we? Or where Mark ends. We're cheating. Why? Yeah, we don't know where Mark ends. What? Say that again? We don't know where Mark ends. Why? The last verse of Mark, as far as we know, is 16:8. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had come upon them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Which doesn't sound like the end of a gospel. Right? Are you all with me? Yes. Now there are 3 or 4 different standard, depending on the textual family you're in, endings. And if we follow one of the standard endings, where does Mark end up? Well, it ends up in Galilee or Jerusalem. Or are you still reading? No, but from where the narrative, from where? From where? Where does it leave Jesus? In Jerusalem, right. And Luke? Where does Luke end? Jerusalem. And John? John is in Galilee, and John has this story with the breakfast. Come have breakfast. Chapter 21:12, Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. All right. So, Jesus, yes, ate fish. What else? He gave, yes, fish to others. So, yes, we agree with the disciples of Christ and the Southern Baptists and the Pentecostalists that you wouldn't necessarily get vegetarianism solely out of the Bible. But we're working on a cyclic thing, see? We start with, and that's what's in the lesson this morning, we start with Genesis, the original diet, which was what? Fruits, grains, and nuts. Then we go to the diet after the fall of man, which adds vegetables. Then we go to the diet after the flood, which adds meat, but forbids, adds meat, but forbids blood. Well, yeah, it limits which animals to a very select group. The lucky animals that get to be eaten. And in the main, what are those? Simple statement, what are those animals? The non-scavenger vegetarian animals. That's the answer. The answer is that the list is the non-scavenging vegetarian animals. That's the distinction.
I never understood that. Have you ever watched the chicken eat?
Well, but see, today's chicken doesn't count. Yeah. So, but it's non-scavenging in general. Remember, too, that the list properly read would further be narrowed by the fact that the list was created for Palestine. 15th to 10th century BC Palestine. So that if we wanted to be technical, we could name the exact fish that could, because there were only certain ones available there. That's why it says don't eat certain things that we'd never think of eating, because they were right there and the Canaanites ate them. So it's a very, very, very specific list to pre-monarchic Israel. Okay? And highly limited. All right. Now, we've taken that progression from before the fall, after the flood, at the time of the Exodus, and we've built a theology on it, saying that these are related events, that they're somehow a progression that can be followed. Now we're working in reverse and saying we're going back in the other direction. We're saying because of the decline of nature and the decline of man, we have to be more careful and specific. Now, how about it? Let's talk about meat eating. Let's pick on it this morning. I'm willing to pick on meat this morning. Jesus ate fish? Yeah, but I wouldn't eat the fish from the Lake of Galilee today. I wouldn't. Why? Oh, it's full of industrial pollution. All those chemical plants that Israel created to farm the Jezreel Valley discharge into the Sea of Galilee. They sell tourist fish there, but what? Yet they are imported fish. They cannot the fish from the lake, because Israel knows it would be bad business to kill your tourists with the fish. Yeah. So, see, the argument sort of doesn't hold. Even a Baptist who didn't believe a word of Adventist theology on this point would accept the idea that it's not a good idea to eat the fish from the Sea of Galilee today if it's going to kill you, right? That makes good Christian sense, doesn't it? Seems like there's no argument there. In the reservoir? Isn't that pure water? Relatively? Oh, I had a real problem with last week's Sabbath school lesson, and I was in a place where it would behoove me not to say anything. Last week's lesson was, it had a Bible verse as the memory verse, but it was really about a quotation from Ellen White. That's really what it was about. And the authors did a good job of disguising the fact that it was a lesson not about the Bible but the writings of Ellen White, which was okay. And this was the statement. Pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power, these are the true remedies. Every person should have a knowledge of nature's remedial agencies and how to apply them. Ministry of Healing 127. When was that written? When was that written? We're going to do exegesis now. What? When was that written? Well, I know you're all hanging back and that you know Ministry of Healing was published in 1905. But I know that you also know that it was a compilation book, that even in Mrs. White's lifetime, many of the books that were published under her name were merely compilations by her staff, as she herself said. She never wrote a book called The Ministry of Healing. You understand that, right? Never, but felt the need to bring out such a book. Why? Because they were pushing the sanitarium work in the 1900s, and there was all this question of the relationship of the church to Battle Creek Sanitarium. Remember, Dr. Kellogg was leaving the church at that time, and he was wanting to turn the medical work into a non-denominational, non-specific Christian sort of social agency. Remember that? And Mrs. White didn't want the health message to be seen as a non-denominational social work. She wanted it to be seen as part of the proclamation of the message of Christ's second coming. Eschatology. That's what Ministry of Healing was made for. She directed her staff to create such a book from out of her writings that would place it in its proper context. That's what she said the book was for. Okay, now this specific statement was written in 1887. Okay, at the opening of Western Health Reform Institute. I suppose you know that too. Okay, and that it was the opening of Western Health Reform Institute was the opening of another one of those water cure institutions, right? And you know, I'm sure, that the water cure was one of the main 19th century preventive medicine movements in America that was closely related to the women's movement. That most of the folks who went to those water cure institutions were women. There weren't any men in sight. Yeah, okay. Now then, this statement is mostly a quotation from somebody else. Mrs. White dressed up the quotation because she thought it missed some things. But it's mostly a quotation from a water cure manual. All right? When was the health reform vision anyway? Well, it depends on whether you're talking about the first major health reform vision in June 6th of 1863, or the one that actually impelled them to found water cure institutions on January 25, 1865. Oh, notes. I love it when notes are being taken. Yes. All right. Now then, the problem with this quotation, which originated originally in a water cure manual from 1857 and was way ahead of its time in 1857, is that it couldn't be written today. I would not recommend this quotation as written today. It's too broad a brush, and it doesn't fit our situation. Can everybody read it? Do you all have your Sabbath School quarterlies? Look, it's on page 55 in mine, but I have a teacher's quarterly, so I don't know where it is in the regular one. It's the front of January 24, lesson 34. Okay, now this is a water cure place established in 1857 in upstate New York, in the mountains. And pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water. Of course, the folks in the Sabbath School lesson last week thought the phrase the use of water meant what? Meant drinking it. That's not what this quotation meant. Friends, I said not a word. Not one word. The whole hour. Now, drinking it was part of what the use of water meant. They did mean drink it, but what did they really mean by the use of water? Well, yeah. For everything. For every disease. If you had cancer, what did they give you? Give you water. If you had pneumonia, what did they give you? They gave you water. If you were pregnant, what did they give you? Water. Hot water. Cold water. Agitated water. Steam. Ice water. And so forth. Right? Hydropathy. If you had a blood disease in the 19th century and you went to an Adventist hospital, what would they do? 140-degree water for 30 minutes at a time. Of course, you didn't have seizures because they kept your brain cold. Oh. Packed your head nice while the rest of your body was boiling. Well, when you came out of that, you didn't have mononucleosis anymore. Why? No, the water cure manual says the patient will be somewhat weak after the treatment and should not be encouraged to walk. I have these from Battle Creek Sanitarium. You get the strong impression it works, and if you also get the impression that if you get into these diseases, you've got to go find somebody who can do this, right? Is there anybody who can do this? Is there anybody who can do this? Oh yeah. There's Adventist clinics that will, where for instance, you could go down to see Dr. Thrash. Yeah, sure. But what's my problem with the quotation? Why am I having a problem with the quotation? What? Well, pure air. See, the folks had interpreted this into the late 20th century. Pure air, sunlight, rest, exercise. What were they picturing? Yeah, I see people jogging along Storrow Drive. And what do you think? At rush hour. What is that person doing? Trying to kill themselves? Yes, that's right. He at least puts a mask over and says that this is to kill you. Pure air. What's the problem with that? Well, there's some relatively, yes. Relatively, but what?
But even up in the mountains,
No, there's not pure air in northern New England. Why? Well, because you're breathing what's left over from Ohio. They set it up and it has a tendency to fall in Vermont and New Hampshire. If you flee to the mountains today, what's there? Pure air. We certainly don't want to recommend sunlight. Why? Today's recommendation would be what? The proper recommendation today would be, don't go out in the sun. Why? Some people should even be recommended, if you go out in the sun, what? Wear a broad-brimmed hat so that what? They don't end up, yeah. So sunlight, abstemiousness. Of course, abstemiousness in 1857 meant don't eat the Victorian diet, right? The Victorian diet was really quite amazing. Rest and exercise. I think those should have had an and between them. We tend to go to one or the other, right? I think they're a set of opposites. Yes. There are those of us who rest, and then there are those of us who exercise. Probably both are, in the method we do them today, are dangerous. The use of water and trust in divine power. We could leave trust in divine power, right? But that's a good statement from 140 years ago that should be carefully edited for today's use, lest you get people reading it straight and acting on what they think it meant. All right? Now, in the same way, in today's lesson, Genesis 1:29 and 3:18, we know what that was about. That was following the diet downward. Then, of course, Genesis 7, 8, and 9. Then Daniel 1 is mentioned here. Was Daniel a vegetarian? We derive vegetarianism from Daniel. He's the patron saint of vegetarianism, I think, at least in the Adventist Church. But I don't think you can arrive at vegetarianism from the book of Daniel. Daniel 1, which is quoted here, was directed to a specific situation, the background of which is pretty clear. Daniel decided not to eat the meat, the food rather, the king's rich food, verse 13. And verse 15 says, at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's rich food. So the steward took away their rich food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Well, it's the background here that counts. You can't read this straight without the background, because, of course, it's not a goal of Americans, at least it shouldn't be a goal of Americans, to be what? 10 times fatter in flesh than the others around you. It's easy enough to end up that way. What was the specific situation to which it was directed again? Daniel and companions were among those hostages of the royal family who had been brought on forced march to Babylon, a journey of 6 weeks on foot as prisoners, and they arrived looking how? How did they look? Emaciated. Yeah, they looked like they'd been in the concentration camp. And the king's orders were specifically directed to the fact that these people were there for political reasons. He needed them. His intent was to train the members of the royal family in Babylonian ways and send them back to rule the country. Daniel was being bred to become the ruler in Judea. Why didn't he ever go back? Because Nebuchadnezzar's plan never worked out. Before he could get people ready to run the government in a Babylonian way, what happened? They had rebelled and he had destroyed them. Okay? So, yeah. Took them in 605. In 597 he had to go back. In 593 there was another major rebellion, and by 586 he destroyed the country. But that was the plan. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted these people in good condition, and seeing them he wasn't happy, and so the purpose of the king's rich food was what? To save their lives and get them back to a healthy state. The problem was that for Daniel and his companions, the food had been offered to idols, and it was unclean food. It's forbidden under the Levitical law. So they didn't eat. So they ate this combination of ground grain, and that's why you could notice a difference at the end of 10 days. Why? In their emaciated condition, who was doing better after 10 days? Well, you can tell if you're almost dead, you're emaciated, that you're not going to want to start out with wine and meat. That obviously the person who started out with water and ground vegetable mixture is going to do better. Sure. But now does that mean what? That's true. That replenishment food that they give is exactly that. That's what they did in Somalia. That's right. Now later on, Daniel's situation wasn't the same. In Daniel 10, see, that's the danger of quoting Daniel 1, but not quoting the rest of the story. In Daniel 10, Daniel takes a vow. He takes a vow to understand the 70-week vision of Daniel 9. Right? And so in chapter 10, verse 2, what does it say? What does it say there? In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies. No meat or wine entered my mouth. nor did I anoint myself at all for 3 full weeks. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that tell you? Yeah, and so if you say, I didn't eat any delicacies, during this vow period, he didn't eat any Hershey drops, right? Or other delicacies that were available in Babylon. And no meat or wine entered my mouth. Indicating what? That in a normal circumstance, Daniel what? Would eat meat and wine. Wine? Wine? Let us remember what both the Levitical and Deuteronomic law says about that, which is what? What? What about wine? You should or should not? You should, yes. This is another thing where you wouldn't derive exactly our position from the Bible, because our position is an eschatological one, not one that's in a normal circumstance. Daniel, like a good Jew, would have drunk wine every day. When? Yes. It was the drink of choice as a food. Now, even today we recognize that there's a great difference between wine as a food and alcohol as a lifestyle, right? In American society, we have alcohol as a lifestyle. That's something different from wine as a food. Can you think of a country where, well, they're all sort of Americanized now, so this is hard. But can you think of a country where there's more wine as a food than alcohol as a lifestyle? France? Why do you say France? And what happens? Yeah. It's a food, isn't it? Yeah, well, I remember it in Greece, it would be unthinkable to eat without them bringing you a table wine. But as a food item for part of the meal.
My father used to make wine for that in the sale, drinking meal.
And that has got extended then to alcohol as a lifestyle, where you don't go into the tavern to have a good evening meal. What? You go into the tavern for the specific purpose of what? Of getting drunk. That's the specific purpose. On Friday night, when everybody jams into the bars, what's the purpose? My coworkers will tell me what? They'll tell me what? I'm going out tonight to get drunk. Yeah. Which is inveighed against in the Bible, isn't it? Yeah. All right, so our position on vegetarianism, again, is an eschatological one. It has to do with our view that the end of the world is at hand. Now look, is there any good external evidence that now would be a good time to consider leaving meat behind? If there's anybody here who hasn't been shrewd enough to figure this out yet? What? Well, but what I liked, and I liked something a government official did. What I liked was he said what? He said they were doing everything right according to what our system requires. We can't police meat, And this is likely, I like it when the Secretary of Agriculture talks straight. This is likely to happen again. Now look, we all live in terror that maybe we're going to get cancer. Every lump and bump, we think, what? I'm dying of cancer, right? Every time we come in contact with somebody we don't know, we think, what? I may be going to die of AIDS. But what? The Secretary of Agriculture says if you go down to McDonald's, you may not need to worry about it. Why? You may be dead by the next day. That's pretty clear. If the Spirit of Prophecy says the time will come when it will be clear that we should leave off flesh foods and milk and butter and eggs, is that pretty clear? We don't need any new vision or new prophet to tell us, say, this may be the time, right? That's an obvious one. And is there any other issue? All right, Ed, control yourself here. Is there any other issue besides that might have to do with vegetarianism? Is there any other argument in favor of it at this time? Yeah, I saw on CNN a study about eating nuts that I thought was skewed. It said they studied the Loma Linda did a study of the evidence in the area, and the more nuts you ate, the thinner you were. And I was thinking, that's a skewed and flawed study because the people who are reporting it don't understand. The evidence to go and buy those raw nuts at the store in bulk are what kind of people? They're the strict vegetarians, right? To say, we don't know why this is, but the more nuts you eat, the thinner you are, according to this study, is skewed. Those strict vegetarian Adventists are eating those nuts in place of what? Meat. And they're probably, the stricter they are, the less other kinds of fats they eat too, right? So that the study didn't really say anything about nuts making you thin. That's an example of a flawed study. Because the way CNN reported it was, eat more nuts, you'll probably get thinner. No, I don't, no. All right. I'm getting at something. Did Mrs. White make another argument besides eschatology for vegetarianism? What? Perfecting Christian character, of course. She talks a lot about that. Is there any other argument in the spirit of prophecy about vegetarianism? Oh. Ah, the kindness to the animal. Stand up. There is, in the writings of Ellen White, a strong argument about the lack of ethics involved in using animals as food. Well, God allowed it. God brought it about. God commanded it. It's not allowed. But Mrs. White says God commanded it because of what? Yeah. It's just like taking every verse in the Bible, using it as a proof text, and equating it as equally. Jesus did the same thing with the text. They asked him a question about divorce and said, Moses says it in the law. That was the final argument. And Jesus said what? He swept away the proof text from the law. As what? Oh, Moses said that because of the hardness of your hearts. He swept it away as non-significant. That's why you got to watch about proof texts. Right? There was this ultimate proof text from the law of Moses, quoted word for word, and Jesus dismissed it as non-significant and not applicable. There shouldn't have been divorce, he said, because of that situation that was described. Ah, same thing with this. Yes, God commanded it, but what do we have to say? We make the same argument Mrs. White makes. Hardness of your hearts. Look, we know that we could solve the problem of starvation. There's a way to do it. What is it? That's right. Don't take the animal and fatten the poor animal unfairly and then slaughter it in a gruesome way to eat various parts of its body. The simpler thing is what? Grow the fine food and feed it to the starving people. And there's enough food right now to keep everybody alive. If we didn't use animals as an intermediate. We could solve the problem right now if human nature could be dealt with. That's an argument in favor of vegetarianism. The other one is the cruelty to the animal. Right? Now an argument is made. Every time this comes up, the argument is made. What's that? See my old belt? I've had it forever. I'm so proud I can still fit into it. It's just further down from my belly button than it used to be. That's how I'm fitting into it. I know that, but I choose not to recognize that at the moment. But what? I don't think I'm going to buy a belt of this type again. I've had these forever. I love them. What's my point? What is it? It's not leather, yeah. It's wonderful. And it was cheap, too. $17. Well, Ian, the same shoe and leather was $97. Ah! Even if I'd had $97, I wouldn't have... Oh! You see these pairs of shoes on sale for $50 or $60? Ah! That was a piece of an animal that they had nothing else to do with. Let's remember that. They'd already eaten the good parts, and now this is the leftover part, and I'm going to pay $50 for it. No, I think I'll pay $17 for my non... The point is that this argument is always made. Oh, we have to have animals. If we didn't have animals, we couldn't have cheese. Which isn't true. We couldn't have belts and shoes. And what am I saying? It's what your culture gets used to, isn't it? Is it a necessity? Sometimes we say things that are necessary when we mean what? They're part of our lifestyle and we need not to change. Right? Did Mrs. White make an argument about the animals? She certainly did. And in fact, it's very interesting how she says this truth came to her. She describes it as this truth came to her. Yes, it's interesting. She was preaching on temperance at a camp meeting in Australia when the evidence message was just beginning. She followed through from the use of rich foods and meats and stimulants, and then going on to coffee, tea, spices, tobacco. You can see the progression, right? Meats, tobacco, drugs, right? You remember what happened? After the meeting was over, there were several thousand people present. Of course, people would talk to her afterwards. This happened all the time. Sometimes, she said, she would be occupied for hours in talking to people and answering the questions afterwards. That was part of the deal, right? A Catholic woman came up to her, she said, and knelt before her and pled with her to consider the plight of the animals and the cruelty to the animals. And she said this truth dawned on her as it never had before and became a permanent part of her preaching and writing thereafter on the subject. All right. So, the question then, did Jesus eat fish What's the answer? Yes, but what? What do we have to say? This famous phrase. That was then. This is now. Yeah. And remember, the argument is a simple one. It has nothing to do with a theology that anybody would disagree with. When you say to the Pentecostalist minister, tell me, since the fish there are dangerous today, would you eat it today? If the answer is no, then what has the person accepted? He's accepted the idea that time and place counts in what you do. Background and exegesis. All right? Okay. So then, what are some things that we can do, simple things that we can do to safeguard health? What are some of the simple ones? Let's list a dozen or so. Real easy. What are some things? What? See, this isn't an Adventist thing anymore. Adventists don't need to be self-conscious about this. Why? I went to a marketing seminar 2 weeks ago, required by my company. Guess what we have to do now? We have to fill out how we are dealing with the requirement of 20 minutes of cardiovascular exercise 3 times a week. The company wants to know. Why do they want to know? Because they don't feel like paying for what they're going to have to pay for me if I have a heart attack before they can get rid of me at age 65. See, now if this were an Adventist institution, we'd say, oh, the church is imposing on my private life. It's not anybody's business what I eat or how I exercise. But since I don't have that advantage, what do I have to say? The company cares how I eat, how much I weigh, and whether I exercise or not. How's that for health message stuff? Oh, of course. They want us to be good salespeople. They said high-stress jobs, you get a lot of adrenaline in your jobs. It tears out the membranes. People in your profession tend to become arthritic early. The answer to that is to take care of the adrenaline by rapid exercise. Oh, I see. Okay. That's the day and age we're in. What else? What are some obvious things? Yes. My company has Adventist rules on this. You can smoke, but what? Just not around anybody. Yesterday in our marketing meeting, my poor 2 colleagues were smoked. It was a warm day. But if it had been today, their problem, guess what? What? They'd be outside with everybody else standing outside the door. Yes, I saw a woman like this the other day. She was outside smoking her cigarettes and on the verge of pneumonia. Because what? Her company rule is what? Not inside the building. Yes?
I was up at Digital Equipment working up there. It had some cartoons that showed this building and some people are standing out on the ledge.
Standing on the ledge.
The guy saying, don't worry, they're not going to commit suicide. That's our new non-smoking.
Yeah. Yeah, my company has Adventist rules about drinking, too. What is that? We have to go to people's homes. What do? They offer you, this is a long, complex process, would you like something to drink? Would you like some wine? What's the rule? No. I'm working. Yeah. These are the Adventist rules. I recognize these. Yeah. What you eat, how much you weigh, when you exercise. You can't smoke, you can't drink while you have any association with the company. I recognize these rules. Now, it's harder for some than for others, isn't it? All right, what else can we do? Reduce the use of lard. That's what it says? Yeah. Well, there is that sensitivity, isn't there? The quarterly said to butter, cream, and lard. I have. In fact, I've stopped using butter and cream. Got this heartbeat stuff that costs 85 cents a pound and has about 20 calories. Yes. This is contemporary stuff. And why it should be such a burden to Adventists when it's part of the culture for the rest of the world, that this is what we're working on, this is the goal we're after. We've got to get rid of the idea that the health message is a problem and a burden. All right, thank you.